Well, hey there, we have an amazing show for you this morning. We're going to be talking about some of the most important pillars in our community. We're so glad and thank you for joining us. Well, good morning, Mobile, and all of our friends along the Gulf Coast. We are so glad you joined us again today for our 8:30 edition of the Echo Stop Live podcast. Of course, as you know, you can join us on YouTube, Facebook, and several other sites to tune in each Friday as we talk about things that are not just conversations to have, but sort of a call to action where we can come alongside you, the viewer, in our community. I'm joined by my very esteemed not only colleague, but a person that I am honored to call a good friend. And I'm pretty sure after we talk about some of the things today that we've got lined up, you'll understand why I know that my good friend Curtis has an amazing heart for the community and for people.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Curtis, I wanted to talk about something today that you and I had mentioned a while back, and we called it the Four Corners.
Absolutely. Let's talk.
And the four corners, sort of signify the fundamental foundation of the community and Operation Echo Stop as a whole. But I really want to dive deep, if you're willing to go with me for a moment. Did you bring your dive gear? Okay.
Splash.
We're going to have a deep dive talk about some very important things. And when we talk about changing the community, when we talk about bringing about change from within the community, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the essential components of what makes a community.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I prepared a little artwork for you today, and I want to show you something that I think will resonate well, and I call it the four corners or the four pillars of the community.
Let's go for it, man.
And so what we're looking at here is not some crazy football play, but a really simple concept that a lot of people might not really appreciate until we talk about it. So I wanted to do that for a minute. And you'll notice there's four things written here. We've got faith, family, school, and government on this side. And what really I want to represent in this conversation is what do each of these things do and how important are they in the community? And more important, what happens when one, two, or three of these things are removed? And then in a few moments later, I want to show you how these tie directly into what we're doing from our approach to make the community safer, to really to impede violence and improve perception. But let's talk about our favorite topic for just a minute. Let's talk about faith.
Sure.
Without a foundation in something, then the structure upon which we rely starts to erode. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
So how important to you then do you think faith is as a pillar in the community?
Faith is the foundation of a community. I think that a community is founded on its beliefs and its practices of its belief. And without faith, what do we have? We have no hope for improving anything that we're currently in. So I like to look at faith as being that foundational pillar, for lack of a better term, and identifying the relevance and importance of it. But I would go even a step further, Kevin, and I would say this, that in addition to that, not taken away from any of the four pillars, but what would you say is the most important outside of faith? Well, how would you value, if you had to value the four, how would you define the value of the four?
Yeah, and I think that's such an amazing point that you bring up, because when you throw four things up there, can all four things be equal? No, all four things have a role, but each of the roles are not equal. And in a minute, I'm going to show you that. So we're going to come back to that, because I'm going to show you how faith plays in and what the value is. And I will just tell you, it is the high scorer on this chart. It is the paramount pillar. It is the pillar of all pillars, because when you pull that, then everything else forces us to rely on another person or another thing. And as we all know, our faith is beyond relying on a person. It's believing in something greater than ourselves. And I feel like that makes it the paramount pillar. But let me talk about family for just a second.
Sure.
A lot of times families don't look the way we think they should. They're not configured the way we think they should. And I say we in quotes and should in quotes, because what really does that look like? But it's something that a child relies on. When it's brought into a family, that family does provide some structure. You mentioned hope for faith, which is interesting because I go back to one of our earlier episodes where we had Dr. Brian Jenkins on talking as a pastor from a church about hope. And the whole conversation was about hope. And so the spiritual value of that, but family too, do people lose some of their hope in the faith because of their family situation?
I believe so. I think that family represents the visual part of faith. I think that without having family, and family can be defined by a number of different things, but I think that you have to have that in order to understand how important your faith is. So it definitely ties to faith. Family and faith are part of the same family, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to speed up a little bit, but you can pull us back. Okay, just a little bit. Because what I like to think about oftentimes is when I said earlier, the value, and you're absolutely right. Faith has the dominant value of all of it. But it's almost like talking about a vehicle and the importance of the parts of a vehicle in order to make that vehicle operate. And some may say, what's the most important part of a vehicle? They may say the engine. And some people may say it's the transmission. Some may say it's the battery. Some may say it's the spark plug. It's actually all of it. Okay, because one doesn't function and do what it needs to do without the cooperation of all the other parts working in tandem together.
Right.
And this is what we're looking at.
So now let me take you to school. Mm-hmm. No, literally, like I want to talk about that third corner, right? So school is up on this chart. Yeah. And I want to talk about it for just a second, and then we're going to take a break for a minute. But I want to talk about school for just a second, because this is a fundamental place where the structure is really a season, if you will, a longer season for most, but a season where structure starts to become enforced beyond just household rules. And I'm going to show you why that's important when we move on in just a minute. But what we're really talking about here is believing in this idea that we can improve our community, because we have to agree that the community needs to change in a way, not it has to change by itself, but we're all part of that community. Let me ask you this question. It's a riddle, no test. Since we're at school, I'm going to give you a quick test. Ahead. More important, culture or vision?
I think vision.
Okay. So would you follow somebody if you didn't understand their culture?
I would not follow someone who I didn't understand. Back up again. Ask me that question one more time.
It's like a riddle, because a lot of times we're so caught up in following the idea that we don't take a moment and really sit back and try to understand why people behave the way they are, what their story is. It is a great question. I stump myself on it all the time too. But think about this. What we really have to do is pause for a moment, hear the story, and then understand the vision, which is the mission and where we're going. And they too actually hold equal roles, because you have to understand where we're going, but you also have to have that relationship, that trust in who you're going there with. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to say that it's kind of a moment where you can sit back and just ponder and think for a minute. And I want you to take a look at this for just a second. Imagine a place where ideas are born. Imagine a collaborative environment with cutting-edge technology and where the safety of our community are joined. Imagine an effort birthed in the heart of our city's transformation and housed along the corridor designed for growth. Imagine a place where the law enforcement mission is joined by leaders, local businesses, visionaries, and academia in an effort so strong that deep within its core, the valuable resources of one can be shared by all. A place where all things can be supported by the pillars of 21st century policing, the latest model of intelligence-led policing, but more importantly, by relationships within our community. The Gulf Coast Technology Center. People. Partners. Progress. Imagine. So I love seeing that we've talked about this before, things are happening behind the scenes, that our city is working for our community. And that's a really good segue from school to the government, because the government is the last pillar, but it's not the only pillar. The government is responsible for providing the safety and security, right? but it can't do it alone. It has to rely on these other four corners. And I feel like school, you've got some intimate knowledge of the school system. And I'm pretty sure I've heard you say that schools are communities within themselves.
Yes, schools are definitely anything that happens outside in our city can and often will happen inside our schools, because our schools are no more than just a concept of our community, or a box that all the communities that we have within that area are compiled in that location. And anything that happens outside can very well happen inside. But you have less space. Everybody's compact. They're all in the same space, which intensifies the problem that they may find themselves inside of the school.
And here's where the weight, and this is, I'm going to forward something to you in a second. When you talk about the weight and the value of things, this is where the weight shifts, I believe, and from what we've seen, because if there's an absence of faith, if there's an absence of certain structure in the family, even though the family's trying, but it just can't provide that amount of structure because maybe of the way it's configured or it's designed, because of circumstances, right? Because of somebody's story. And that's not a knock. That's a truth of, we're not all in the same design, even though we were all designed for a purpose, right? Then school bears a little more weight in certain situations because it has to assume the structure that might be absent elsewhere. And government's the same way. We rely on the police, but the police should not be the first responders to social issues all of the time. But they wind up in certain situations, which is why we have started programs that take us outside of just an enforcement model and put us into a community model, into a mental health model, into, we call it co-response, but it's really multi-response.
Right. You know, being that the sums are not equal, but they all have value and they all come together to create the value that allows us to move forward. Schools are the conduit that helps us improve family stability and faith. But it's unfortunate that we are pulling back some of the things in schools that shouldn't be, that reinforces faith and family.
Right.
And we didn't do that, then we would allow there to be less of a need for government playing a role in things that oftentimes we see that, why is government actually involved? It's because we're taking away some of the most important things that need to be in place in the school, that it can help strengthen the family and support faith.
Guess what? There's two ways for our viewers to get involved. We have an email that they can send an email to. That's echostoplive@gmail.com, echostoplive@gmail.com. We would love for you to send us an email. We'll try to get to at least one every show. If not, we'll certainly respond to all of the emails that we get in general. And there's also an anonymous tip line. Like, we're talking about what happens when pillars are removed, but what about when there's early warning? What about when there's things that can be said ahead of time? So 844-251-0644. This is our anonymous tip line. It's 844-251-0644. You can text us. You can call that number. There's places around town you can scan a sign and a QR code and send us an anonymous text. But we encourage you to participate through this avenue to send us information. And now I want to flash forward, and I want to show you how these four corners transform into something a little more tangible within the community as far as improving our perception and impeding violence. And what you're looking at here is the same four corners. We're just calling them something different now. And so you have prevention, you have deterrence, you have compliance, and you have detection. And what I really want to show you is how prevention is truly different than deterrence. A lot of times people say, oh, prevention is the same as deterrence. No, prevention stops it before it ever starts. Prevention is a mindset change to where the bad idea never crosses your mind. That's faith. When you believe in something to its core, your behavior is adjusted. And we're not perfect. And we mess up from time to time. But our mindset is such that we don't even want to contemplate whatever that negative activity is. Deterrence is a little different, because deterrence means there's been some influence. There's been something that has affected your decision. It crossed your mind. You thought about doing that bad act, maybe, but something stopped you. And when we're talking about gun violence, it may be that there are cameras or there are people that will report things. And so you may have thought about resolving your conflict in a wrong way, but because there was some influence that we may not even know what it was, something deterred you. Now, compliance is when we physically get involved, right? So now you're going to do something, you didn't get deterred, but something else stopped you along the way. Maybe you got pulled over. Maybe you got called into late at work or something. There was some other thing. And so there's a sort of last minute check. And then, of course, detection is on the unfortunate incident has occurred. And now law enforcement or some other government entity has become involved in. And it's amazing to see that prevention is really like faith. And so is deterrence like home, because you don't do things at home because we don't want mom and dad to get us in trouble.
And in law enforcement, we like to call it pulling levers. Okay. When we look at deterrence, meaning that if I do this, this will happen. So I'm not going to do this because I know this will happen. Mom and dad, if I don't come home in time, then this will happen. So I'm not going to do it because that will be the result. And that's very much deterrent. That's me stopping something from happening because I've explained what the penalty will be for doing it. When we look at prevention, prevention is me teaching you the things that we need to teach you so that deterrence doesn't have to come into play at all, because now you know, and not just know, but you understand the importance of why you don't come in at a certain time, that you come in at the right time. That's education. That's me explaining to you, not just telling you, but actually explaining to you why.
Yeah, and I feel like that understanding the why also goes back to understanding the story. And, we look at compliance and detection like, oh, well, let's call the authorities. Somebody has to get involved in something. Well, schools are actually like the compliance because they teach us rules. Mm-hmm. They teach us how to be rule followers. They teach us how to color in the lines and to follow certain steps and to use formulas. And so all of these things and I was never good at math, but I understood one thing, that there were formulas, that there was a process. And that process and that way of thinking has actually helped me in other things that were non-math related because I'm not mathematically gifted.
But that goes back to what you just showed earlier. Okay, the schools are here. You have family, you have faith. Compliance is the conduit that helps strengthen that helps strengthen deterrence and prevention. Because if I'm reinforcing what you should know from the family and from just basic instruction of living, then I'm more likely to not have to be someone who has to be on the other end of this detection.
Okay, and I'm going to close out the school board for a moment, and we're going to put our logo back up on the screen there so that we can just have a general conversation. And I really believe that there's a bigger issue that really plays into this whole thing, and that is, you've heard of the broken window theory?
Yes.
Right? Familiar with it? Mm-hmm. There's a theory out there in law enforcement that really tells us that, if something is left to decay or something is left to deteriorate, that will in turn breed other deterioration. I'd like to create an analysis, if you will, or a comparison to the broken window into what I would call in those four corners. When you start pulling those corners out of society, what I would call a broken promise. Mm-hmm. Because we are all entrusted into this community with hope. You said it in the very beginning. And if you take away the things that inspire us to have hope, right? And you say, well, I have hope because I have faith. Yeah, but if you take faith out of it, if you take family out of it, if you take schools out of it, are you not breaking that promise, that commitment that we have? And I believe that same broken promise, and I want to hear your thoughts, but that same broken promise, just like a broken window might lead to a burglary, that same broken promise might lead to a tragedy because somebody is missing a core component of it. And I want our podcast, I want our community, I want our effort, I want all of our people to help fulfill that promise by not breaking this promise, but by bringing these pillars back together. What do you think on that?
I think it goes back to something I said before, and that is people who don't value themselves don't value others. It is so important to establish what any young person needs to understand so that as an adult, they understand it fully and that they're able to actually pass that information along, the importance of faith, the importance of family, and the importance of compliance, so that you don't find yourself in a position in which you're now having to deal with the consequences of failing to meet those three things that are very important. So in essence, any society needs people who feel and sense their sense of self-actualization, sense of being relevant, sense of importance, sense of being able to achieve things that they hope for.
Yeah.
And when that does not happen, And it will not happen when those basic fundamental principles are not met. It's hard to visualize those things. And when that does not happen, then the end result is the unraveling of society.
And I want to get to a question.
Yeah.
So we have an email question, and this comes from Rodney here in Mobile. And so thank you for sending in your question. His question is a pretty simple question. It says, regarding Four Corners, where do you start if one is missing? And you know what my answer to that is?
What is that?
Somewhere, anywhere. Mm-hmm. Because I think it takes a long time for this process to break down. And that's a great question. You know, how do you get involved? Where do I start? And I feel like the answer is anywhere that you can start is a great place to start. Just start and bring it in. Faith is great because we have a great faith support system along the Gulf Coast. There's lots of organizations. There's lots of places you can go. There's also the faith community. There are churches and our temples and synagogues and everything. And so these are places where people can go to find faith, but there's also faith in people who are in our community doing different things along the way, whether it's sports or education programs that are faith-inspired. Those things are easy. The family may be a harder one to tackle because it's a situational-based in a lot of things. But I think you start somewhere.
You know, I would agree, and I would also say that for me, it's more about faith. It is more about laying that foundation, making sure that before I build anything else, that the foundation is solid.
Which is why that's at the top of the list.
and so faith is extremely important. And you know, I'm not here to tell you what that should be for you. I can tell you what it is for me. Okay. And that is a belief in something bigger than me and something that I believe wholeheartedly is the reason why I'm here today. And that's my faith in God. I believe that I have to have something that I'm anchored in so that I can see that regardless of the things that may be happening around me, that my faith is not shaken. Okay.
I've got a final question for you because we're about to sign off for this great episode. Trick question, but there's no trick answer because this is all you.
Yeah.
Curtis, what drives you to be the person that you are that supports these corners and really wants to make this place a safer place?
Because I know it's bigger than me, Kevin. I know that it's bigger than me. I know that we all are here for a purpose, for a reason. I understand the relevance of everyone, and regardless of what you do, that you should never devalue your own self. You should make sure that you're understanding that because you're here, that means that there's something here for you to do that incorporates more people than just the people that are surrounded by you day in and day out. For me in the community, being someone in law enforcement for the years that I've been in law enforcement is something that I understand wholeheartedly because I know families. I've been impacted by families who've been impacted by violence. And because of that, I understand that it's bigger than me because people are in need of being assured that regardless of how bad things may be, that there is a thing called faith that I should look for and submit myself in so that I can deal with all the things that are happening and all the things that may come later.
Well, if our viewers are wondering why I asked that question as we sign off the show, I wanted you to see and hear firsthand why it was that I opened this podcast by telling you what an amazing person that I have the honor of sharing a desk with here Fridays at 8:30 on our podcast. And so now you heard it yourself. There's a reason behind why he's driven, and I am driven as well. But really the important thing is you, the viewers who participate in this. We want you to tune in with us on Fridays, get involved in the community. At 8:30 on our podcast, we're across different channels, YouTube, Facebook Live, and a bunch of other places. We need you not just to see something and say something, but to actually do something. These four corners are only as strong in the community as you are in the community to support them. And we aren't asking you to do something that we don't want to do. We want to come alongside you. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us for an amazing episode where we kind of went to school for a minute, but we really visited the four corners of what Echo Stop is truly about. And it's about you, the viewer, living in a safe community that you deserve. And we will fight every day to continue to come alongside you and make that happen. Again, send us your emails, echostoplive@gmail.com, or go ahead and give us an anonymous tip if you see something and want to say something. That's 844-251-0644. Until we see you again on our next Friday's podcast, I wish you a safe and happy weekend. Take care.